each other for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to kind of dive into everything that's coming up with the inauguration and everything surrounding that, protesters threatening to protest and disrupt it. We'll get into that, but let's kind of dive into the presidency itself, because we have Trump coming in, Obama leaving. We know what under Obama, the Clintons, the Bushes, we see an increase in power. And, many of us have, warned about this. You cannot give the, federal government this much power. You definitely can't give the executive branch this much power, because even if you agree with the person that's in office right now, when you give that power to that executive branch, eventually someone you don't like is going to be in there. I've brought this up for years and years. And it seems that still when let's say Trump's going into office now, you have diehard Trump supporters. Well, if Trump starts silencing the left, that Trump supporter might not, be too offended by that, but he should, because eventually, by giving the executive branch the power to silence free speech, eventually you're going to have the left in power, and then you will be silenced. And we're going to go ahead and dive into a Ron Paul Liberty Report, talking about executive power in the age of Trump. And we'll go ahead and dive into this and cover this after the clip.
And thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Today we have a very special guest, and we're very pleased to have a friend of ours, somebody that's worked with us when we were in Washington, and also he serves on the board of advisors on the Ron Paul Institute. So it's very nice to welcome you to the program, Louis Fisher.
Great to see you.
Good. Lou Fisher is a specialist in one subject that we have always been fascinated with, and that's how I got to know him. And that is he's been a senior specialist at the research, at the congressional research, for over nearly 40 years, and he is considered the expert. I think he's testified more than once or twice, to Congress. I wish they'd listened more often to him, but no, dozens and dozens of times. And he's written many, many articles, and he's published many, many books. He has a PhD, and he has a law degree. But the most important thing, he has his head on straight, and he understands the Constitution, and he understands probably one of the most vital things about our Constitution that's generally ignored, and that is the thing that the founders put in there of separating powers and having the checks on balance, which has been totally ignored. So, Daniel, I know you've known Lou for a little bit.
Lou was one of those great gems in Washington where he would be called on from Republicans, from Democrats. He was just a font of knowledge and wisdom, you know, and so he was not a partisan person. He was a champion of the Constitution, and he remains so active. He's with the Constitution Project now. Lou, he has a new book coming out in the summer that looks really interesting because we've had a few of topics like this when we were on the Hill. His book will be called Supreme Court Expansion of Presidential Power, Unconstitutional Leanings. Lou, I'd love to hear some more about that book.
Okay, I do have to correct a little bit here and say that I do not have a law degree, but I publish regularly in law reviews, and as you know, my interest in separation of powers. But the book coming out, talking about unconstitutional leanings, a lot of my friends says you can't write a book like that because the Supreme Court decides what is constitutional. But I think I make a very persuasive case that starting in 1936 with the Curtis Wright case and up to the present time, the Supreme Court, through errors and misconceptions that has been pointed out decade after decade, has pushed presidential power beyond constitutional bounds and has weakened the role of Congress. That's the theme of my book.
That sounds fascinating. You know, Lou, we're looking at a new administration coming in just a couple of days, and we're dealing with issues of separation of powers. We're dealing with the legacy of the Obama 8 years and the preceding 8 years of the Bush administration and a further erosion of legislative powers. And now we're dealing with issues of war powers. We've had 8 years steady of war. Where do you see the war powers issue as we enter this new administration?
Well, one thing, I always liked meeting with Ron Paul, and we had lunches. Remember, we talked about institutional duties. And when I was there, I know your office and other members of Congress had pride in their institution and understood the need of checks and balances. And that's what I've seen decline a lot, that Congress has abdicated its powers, basic ones, spending and war, and they don't play the regular checks on the executive branch that the frame is expected it to.
You know, your point about only the Supreme Court determines the Constitution, I guess we could eliminate the oath of office and that we pledge to follow the Constitution. What's it says? The Congress, the Supreme Court will take care of. But that is more real than we sort of laugh, but they really believe this. I can remember when I was really, really naive, the first week or two, I was in Washington and I was put on the Education and Workforce. That was considered low level, not the Ways and Means or the Rules Committee. And they came up with some preposterous bill, which from my viewpoint, it was totally unconstitutional. So I raised my hand and I get my 2 cents worth in. And the chairman of the board says, "Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll pass this, and the courts will tell us whether or not it's constitutional." And I thought, boy, I have a job here. You know, I didn't realize how determined they were. But no, I think what you just mentioned here was the important thing that attracted me to what your work was the fact that, and I know you used to try to figure it out, why does the Congress give up their prerogatives and their responsibilities? The founders had an intent. You know, they thought, you know, it's closer to the people. You throw them out if you don't like them, and they have clout. The president can't pass a bill that the Congress doesn't pass, and they can't finance anything. They declare war. And have you figured it out? Is why have they been rolled over? Is there some invisible shadow government there that has seductive control over the members or over the leadership?
I think there are a lot of reasons for it, and I do think that when Congress decided, they were uncomfortable about having so much power in committees and subcommittees. It looked like too decentralized, and people said, you ought to centralize yourself like the president. Well, once you took power away from committees and subcommittees and put it in the Speaker's office, I think that was part of the decline in Congress. And the second big one, I think, is the Supreme Court case recognizing that somehow corporations are people and they have a right of free speech, and you have to give them all the right to spend all they want. So I think you have members of Congress, as you know as well as I do, they come in maybe on Tuesday, Wednesday, heading home on Thursday. Some weeks they don't come in at all. So they're not there. They're out raising money.
That's it.
That's a great point about the committees and the loss of power of the members. And even just in the 11 years I was with you, Dr. Paul, I noticed the committees getting less and less important, and the members, individual members, having less and less input, to the point where the hearings, especially toward the end, were among 3 people who agreed on exactly everything that the chairman wanted. So there was really no point in even going.
It seems like the Congress goes out of their way to opening up the door for the individual that might be a very aggressive executive branch manager. The president might just walk through there and enjoy these things. So it looks to me like we still have a big job ahead of us, even though you've been fighting this, Lou, for a long time, is trying to wake up the Congress. And do you think the people are different right now? They're angry and upset with everything. But do you think it's all a healthy thing, or are they going in the wrong direction? Do you think there's signs that what's happening in Washington is that we are going to emphasize, the responsibility of the Congress and not concede so much to the president? Or do you think it's going to be more of the same?
I did a book a couple of years ago, the very strange title, Congress, Protecting Individual Rights. And people would think, are you crazy? The Supreme Court protects individual rights. Well, I think my book shows very clearly that if you look at Congress and the Supreme Court and the president protecting the rights of blacks, of women, of children, religious liberty, Congress has a much stronger record protecting individual rights. So that's one problem. Now, when I did the book, I learned that one reason Congress isn't popular like the other 2 branches, we idealize the president, we idealize the Supreme Court. The reason is that constituents and people watch Congress in committee and in floor debate, and what they see are disagreement, debate, amendments. And of course, they don't see that on the other 2 branches because you don't see inside the other 2 branches. So Congress, when it disagrees and has amendments and debates, that's what Congress is supposed to do. That's what any legislative body does. So Congress, because of that bias by the public, is never going to be popular, and it can't be bothered by that. But it has a duty to push back against abuse, both by the president and by the Supreme Court. And people say, well, if the Supreme Court decides something, that's final unless the Supreme Court changes its mind or unless we amend the Constitution. And I know all of us should know that that's nonsense. That when the Supreme Court, on the Lilly Ledbetter case, where she had been underpaid for decade after decade, and the Supreme Court said, well, you didn't file within 150 days. And within a couple of years, Congress passed legislation. It was signed into law in 2009 saying that when a company discriminates against a woman on pay, that discrimination goes from one paycheck to the next, and a woman can file at any time. So Congress, there's a recent example, 2009, where Congress is protecting individual rights that had been damaged by the Supreme Court.
Lou, how much blame do you place on the educational system of the country? Because it seems like you hear too many people who come out with these cliches, which comes from somebody that doesn't understand the Constitution. Well, the Constitution has to be adapted. You know that. It has to mold for the times. They don't even talk about amendment. Just do it and change it. But, if you compare what some of our young people are getting from the government school system to what happens in private schools and homeschooling, they have a different attitude, and they seem to have a much better grasp of this. So do you put much blame on the educational system, or is that just looking for an excuse?
I put a huge amount of blame on it by law schools and law professors and experts will say, just as I said before, that when the Supreme Court decides a constitutional question, that's it, unless the court changes its mind, unless we amend the Constitution. And anyone who follows things, do you recall back around 1986 in the Reagan years, there was a Captain Goldman, an Orthodox Jew, had been in the Air Force for years. He always wore his yarmulke indoors on duty, no problem. Then the Air Force, for some reason, says you can't. So he got into court, and he lost in district court, he lost in appellate court, he lost in Supreme Court. End of the world? No. You may remember that Congress within 1 year passed legislation telling the military, change the stupid regulation, allow people in the military to wear religious apparel unless it interferes with military duties. And people can ask, how can that be? The Supreme Court decided that. Why? What gave Congress the right? Well, if you look at Article 1, who has power over military regulations? It's Congress. So there's a great current example, but it's completely overlooked by experts. They somehow want to put total power in the Supreme Court on constitutional issues, and it's never, ever been that way.
Right.
Such an important issue. I hate to move on, but moving on to war powers. You know, Lou, you may have seen this article in Politico last month. The title was Congress Leaves Trump with Unlimited War Powers. And it seems that now some members of Congress, probably particularly Democrats, but maybe some Republicans, are terrified now that after 8 years of Congress doing literally nothing about Obama's wars, you're having someone come in office that at least looks pretty muscular when it comes to exerting executive power. I would ask you straight, do you think that the 2001 authorization was valid for the things that President Obama used it for during his term?
No, and you and Ron Paul may remember that when the 2001 authorization for use of military force was debated, President Bush wanted authority not just to act against al-Qaeda and Taliban, he wanted in the future to act against any terrorist group. And Congress says, no, that's way too broad. We're not giving you that power. But that's essentially what the Obama administration is arguing, that 2001 statute would protect the president to act against any terrorist group. That's exactly what Congress denied in 2001.
You know, I remember well the debate leading up to the resolution 2002, the Iraq War resolution. And of course, I was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the time, and I introduced a resolution for declaration of war. And of course, I said I was, so strongly opposed to the war itself, but I didn't like what they were doing, and it was too serious, and we should be talking about, this could end up war. People could die from this. So I wanted them to at least be on record of that. And I remember introducing it, infuriated Republicans and Democrats. They were just really angry. And even the chairman, I remember so clearly, the chairman of the committee, spoke, and he says, Ron, he's Congressman Paul, blah, 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 but let me tell you, that is this business about declaring war by the Congress. He says that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. And I thought, well, I lose again. I guess he just amended the Constitution. But there are so many times, and you've written about so many, I think where the line is more difficult for me to draw is when there is not a need to declare war, but maybe a need for some action. And that to me, of course, I think a little bit of action tends to lead to a lot of action, so I don't like all that. But do you find, you've written about some of these places where even Jefferson was able to give some authority or get some authority from the Congress without a declaration of war?
Some years ago, there was a senator who on the floor, Clinton was about ready to go into Haiti on the basis of a UN resolution. And the senator said, the Jefferson precedent said that Jefferson acted unilaterally. And I wrote a CRS report saying that, no, Jefferson did certain things of a defensive nature in the Mediterranean. Then he came to Congress and says, beyond the line of defense, I cannot go. I need authority from you for offensive action. And Congress passed 10 statutes, both for Jefferson and Madison. And we have had wars, like the quasi-war against France was not declared. That was the first one, 1798. Certainly, Gulf of Tonkin was another time we didn't declare war, but it was a statute. So you can either do it by a full declaration or statute. But what you cannot do, which is, I think, completely unconstitutional, is go to the Security Council for, quote, authority, or go to some NATO allies for authority. And that's been the pattern from Truman on to today, including Obama going into Libya, going to the Security Council. So that, to me, all unconstitutional wars.
So, Lou, the issue now is whether President Trump will go to Congress for an authorization for the war on terror, global war on terror. He doesn't seem to be bothered by the prospect, and probably it looks more like a formality. He said, wouldn't bother me at all doing that. We probably should have done that in the first place. Do you think the idea of an authorization has been, I don't know, cheapened by the process that you've mentioned, and certainly the precedent of 2002 with a very vaguely worded authorization for Iraq? What might it look like if he does get such an authorization? What should it look like?
I think first of all, it should be short term so that Congress can authorize it, and after maybe 2 years, see what is actually happening, and then decide what to do after that. I don't think it should be open ended. And we're very early in the Trump years. I think Republicans must know that if Trump exercises poor judgment like other presidents have done, it can damage the Republican Party for decades to come. So I think that one of the big checks on Donald Trump should be Republicans in the House and the Senate that ought to go back and figure out what the Constitution means and uphold the Constitution.
One thing that I talk about, I want to see if I get your opinion about, and that is, how do these things end? I lived, as you did, through the Cold War, and I was drafted in the 60s. I was in the service for 5 years through Cuban crisis and this sort of thing. And the scare by the Soviets was significant and real, but it dissipated. It disappeared, and it was gone, and we didn't have to use our nukes. And the whole empire disappeared. But we have the same thing right now. We're in a lot of countries. We're overextended. And in a practical way, do you think it's more likely that we're going to just get more sensible members of Congress and get a sensible president and change this strategy and this policy? Or do you think if it does come to an end, it'll more likely come to an end because we flat out can't afford it anymore?
Well, when Obama came in with the 2 wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think he made it as part of his agenda, his legacy, to get out of both countries. Well, we're still in both, and I think there's a legitimate reason now. The reason to bring all troops out of Iraq, hoping it would be in self-government and stable, that was partly George W. Bush. They couldn't get an agreement, and partly Obama wanting to show that he can get out of Iraq. So suddenly, as we know, Iraq is very divided along religious lines, and the Islamic State comes in. And we're still in Afghanistan. I think Obama wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but I think if we did and NATO gets out, the likelihood of the Taliban coming back in and destroying all the liberties that have been built up. So, no, you're right. This is very, very, very costly. And the idea that you can go into a country and get out, I think we destabilized the Middle East with a war starting in 2003. And look what we did. Look what Obama did in 2011, going into Libya and getting rid of Gaddafi. And it's a failed state now and a breeding ground for terrorism. So the idea that we are some peace-bringing country has been the opposite.
Right. Lou, we're going to have to go, and I want to thank you very much for being with us today. I also want to thank you for being on the board of directors on the Ron Paul Institute. But we really appreciate you being with us today.
A pleasure being with you.
That is great. And I want to just say a few words to the viewers that we are very pleased to have Lou Fisher on here, and you do need to look that name up and find out. I mean, he has so many books and so much insight. And it's right on with the Constitution, which is very rare. But he has responded every time we have called, and even mentioned in our interview today about the several times that he came to the office and met with other members and to serve on the board to guide us when we need advice on the board on the board of advisors for the Ron Paul Institute. I think it's just great that we have access to a person like this. So we wish him well and thank him very much for being with us. And I want to thank all of the viewers today for being with us for this very important program. And please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, ronpaullibertyreport.com. Check them out. Subscribe on YouTube. Okay, now, it's something we talked about, and definitely when we start looking at wars, there's a trend that happens. We are always at war under every president. And we've been warned about the military industrial complex. And it's done nothing but continue to grow. And with all these microaggressions happening between Russia and the U.S., you know, the Middle East, China, I think it's becoming more aware that we're in some type of war already. Now, you kind of narrow that back just to America. And with, you know, the United States being so divided, it's almost like it's a civil war of different types. And with, excuse me, now with this inauguration happening, there are a lot of reports of the anti-Trumpers trying to shut down the city. Let me bring some of these articles up here. We had a gentleman set himself on fire in front of the D.C. Trump Hotel. And we had a Florida man, this out of the MiamiHerald.com, Florida man charged with making online threat against Trump. A South Florida man has been charged with threatening to kill President-elect. In a video posted online, a Miami Beach police report Wednesday identified the suspect as 51-year-old Dominic Pupolo. Jail records show he is being held without bail on state charges of threatening harm against a public servant. Court records do not list a lawyer for him. And that's out of the Miami Herald. And, you know, we've had reports out that they're wanting to shut down the subway. And it's becoming very chaotic. But a lot of that is also a facade. It's becoming chaotic after they already made people believe it was already chaotic. And I think that's something a lot of people are understanding. There's a lot of other things going on that should have our attention. But because of this constant media dividing the country, and I truly do blame a lot of the mainstream media, because they will hype things that statistically are dropping off. You know, if there's an issue and statistics are showing that this is getting a lot better, they'll take that one instance and just plaster it everywhere for weeks. And you would think that this is just happening everywhere all the time, and it's out of control. When in reality, even though certain things might kind of be getting a little bit, out of hand, that usually comes after they media blast the first event. And we seen this after Columbine. After the media just pouring so much attention into Columbine. And Columbine wasn't the first school shooting, but the national media just bombardment of attention. Shortly later, they were talking about copycats. There's going to be all these copycats, copycat this, copycat that, and they were blasting that for, almost a year. And then we come in an age where how I've almost interpreted it from younger people is that, school shootings aren't, abnormal. Well, they were before the media started blasting them all the time. And I'm not talking about, should the media report? Yeah, the media should report. But when it becomes a month, 2-month, year-long, event where every show on the network is having a special report, exclusive, new bombshell, and it just continues and continues, it leads to this. And it seems to be what they're trying to push for the anti-Trump movement. Sorry. Now, if we look at Hollywood has almost become stronger than the news outlets. They can put out fake stories, get away with it, because they're not reporting news. And when you look at mainstream media now, people are taking more advice from, whoever media star be on Twitter. And you wonder why Trump's using Twitter. He understands that. He understands how powerful that is. Then it also is kind of a snub to the media outlets that bashed him. He's not limiting their speech. He's just not going to contribute to it. A lot of people have been on the issue of free speech, which I also, I'm a big, advocate, but also I'm very suspicious of Trump with free speech because of comments he made, and that's where my fear comes from. But by going, I'm not going to answer any of your questions or take any of your questions because I believe that you purposely put out false reports. You can do that. I can do that. I don't necessarily, think the president can't. Now, if you think he's doing this to legitimate outlets that aren't, trying to bash him but aren't supporting him, that are just reporting facts, well, that might be something for you to realize in the character of that person. Me personally, I don't trust most mainstream outlets. I trust them to put some facts out there with a twist. And really, a lot of alternative media has become the same way to extent. Like I say, we live in an age of a biased media. Certain mainstream medias put out such false information that goes along with one narrative that even in alternative media that, someone tries not to be biased, there is a level of bias, because if mainstream is putting out a socialist narrative, when you're trying to prove that, it's going to tend to lean another direction. That's a bias. And it's definitely in an age that is so divided, you're not going to get away from that. Even though, myself, I try not to be, a biased person, but I am to a certain extent. I recognize that. I try to be biased to the facts, but I do have my personal, belief, but I try not to force that upon others, nor do I want to restrict their way of living. But I also don't want them to have some artificial authority to make me go along with their way of living and thinking. You have the right to live your life, but I have the right to live mine. And I think that is one of the largest things that's missing in our society. Okay. Let me get this next one up here. Okay. Maybe. Sorry. I've just been having all kinds of issues with my internet today. I think my modem is finally burning up. Gets pretty hot. I even have a external fan on it. Try to keep it cool. Okay, there we go. Now, we have a lot of people that are still trying to push all this fake news. And a lot of it is meant to try to bash certain news groups or certain individuals. And, because I was not a Hillary supporter, I was accused of being a Trump supporter. And because I'm willing to wait to judge Donald Trump on the fruits of his labor, meaning I'm going to look at his actions rather than just his talk. And because I'm willing to do that, I'm a pro-Trumper. Now, I'm willing to admit that I think under Trump, I personally will see less negative effects, but that doesn't mean that those powers won't be given to government that eventually could turn around and bite me in the butt. So there are a lot of things that Trump has said that I think is very anti-freedom. There are other things that he has said that I think are pro-freedom. I'm not pro-Trump. I'm not anti-Trump. I'm pro-freedom. And that's the basis of it. We Are Change has basically been, receiving some of that flack, when they put out something that's like, hey, Trump said this, and they're like, oh, you're pro-Trump. Well, We Are Change put out a clip today answering that, and the answer given, I think, was uniquely put. So I wanted to play that real quick. Cue that up.
I wanted to take this opportunity to address a question that many of you asked me for a very long time, and I never had the opportunity to really respond. But now, with the Chelsea Manning latest news, it's a perfect time to answer the question of whether, quote, I am a racist, bigoted, pro-Donald Trump supporter, or whether I'm a leftist, liberal, snowflake, social justice warrior. And this is a very important question because we are seeing polarizing media, echo chambers, and a destruction of principles based on tribalism and party lines, and also AdSense revenue. I'll explain that later on, and I'll explain my principles and where I officially stand. The question could be best explained with the current situation unfolding right now with Chelsea Manning. As we know, Chelsea Manning's sentence was commuted. The right has responded by making fun of her and calling her a traitor. Ben Shapiro said, quote, no. See, traitors are bad, whether they're men or men who think they're women. But Ben Shapiro is the same person who had no qualms, no problems using WikiLeaks before. Listen.
Okay, so here's how this works. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is at the DNC. Rigged the election for Hillary Clinton, right? Put her thumb on the scale for Hillary. Hillary hires her.
Yeah, I'm a total hypocritical butthole that will use information to my liking and my gang affiliation that I like, and I don't care about the truth on my opinion.
What is wrong with you, Ben? Seriously. Not only disparaging comments against Chelsea, but for God freaking sakes, you're okay with using WikiLeaks when it attacks the Democrats, but the WikiLeaks source that was able to expose the truth about the Republicans and George W. Bush, no, traitor. Same with Tucker Carlson. What the hell is wrong with you? I really enjoyed Tucker Carson's show before, but today really angered me with this asinine comment that he made.
On the same day, one of Chelsea Manning, who betrayed the country, and one of a Puerto Rican terrorist who sought to wage war against the country. What do these have in common, other than the obvious, they're both anti-Americans?
Well, anti-American, goes on to call them traitors. No, Chelsea Manning is a whistleblower. She is a hero, a patriot who told us what the government did not want us to know. You simply don't like her because she exposed the Republican president. You defended WikiLeaks before on your national broadcast and the people's right to know what WikiLeaks releases.
I get it. But are you arguing that voters should not have had the right to see that information? If you could take it back, would you say voters, you're not allowed to see that information?
Well, I would say
people should have the right to know what their government is doing when the Democrats are doing it, but when the Republicans do it under George W. Bush, no. You're a traitor. You're anti-American. Does Tucker even understand that it was Chelsea Manning that put WikiLeaks on the map? It was Chelsea Manning's information that she leaked, that gave to WikiLeaks, that gave WikiLeaks its prominence, that made WikiLeaks the enemy of the state. They have been supported by the right. They have been supported by Donald Trump supporters who are now biting their tongue in utter hypocrisy and uttering the lines of neoconservatives like frickin' Judith Miller, who came out. And the same with that segment on Tucker Carlson's show, talking about how Chelsea Manning endangered the lives of Americans. And Judith Miller goes on to say that Chelsea Manning's revelations killed Americans. That is not true. There's a Guardian article with the transcript with recordings from the actual court hearing of Chelsea Manning that shows that no U.S. soldier died, but you're still ushering those lines. Put your frickin' bow tie back on, Tucker Carlson, and maybe you could get your head on straight, because your full hypocritical bullcrap right now just shows you how biased you are. Now, this leaves the question, like, Luke, where do you stand? I mean, obviously, you know where I stand on this issue right now, but I've been doing this for about 14 years now, and my principles never change. They are always pro-free speech, pro-whistleblowers, pro-freedom, pro-truth, pro-accountability from our representative government that is supposed to represent us, that our taxes pay for. Always anti-war, because that is never the solution. And I've been on those principles for a very long time. Whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, it doesn't matter. Those core principles that I have in myself, that are the truest version of myself, have never freaking changed, and they never will, because those are important principles who make me who I freaking am. And it's not just me getting flack now, because now I'm being called a social justice warrior, when previously before, when I was talking about Donald Trump's constant fights with the intelligence agencies and mainstream media and Democratic operatives that were pushing for war, people were calling me a Donald Trump supporter. Now I'm being called a social justice warrior because of this. It's not just me. It's also our intrepid reporter, Cassandra Fairbanks, who's getting a lot of flack and a lot of hatred, and she pointed it out perfectly. The left hates me because I support WikiLeaks, and now a bunch of people on the right are mad because I support WikiLeaks sources. What the hell is happening here? It makes no absolute sense at all, and we're seeing the true face of hypocrisy, no principles at all, and asinine, dumbish comments that have no validity of any truth, because they're just biased propaganda bullcrap. Now, I pointed out the fact of how now right-wing people and pro-Trump people are being hypocritical, some of them. Now it's important to point out the left. And there was an incident that happened in 2012, where a Daily Caller reporter interrupted and supposedly heckled Barack Obama. The mainstream media and the left responded with just totally freaking out, an outcry, calling this reporter a thug, saying he should be disbarred. He's saying he should be banned, never work in Washington, D.C. again, have his press credentials stripped away from him, and what he did was incredibly rude and bad. But CNN does a very similar thing and interrupts Donald Trump and speaks over him and was rude to him, and now CNN is declaring the end of free speech, and they were right, and they were justified in doing that, showing you their utter hypocritical side. And then Cucker, goddamn Cucker, what is wrong with you? Seriously, bro? Cucker, I hate to do this. You too. Good reporters heckles Obama, rude reporters interrupt Trump. Like, seriously, stop with the duplicitous messages. Personally, I believe journalists should heckle the crap out of elected officials. Ask questions and demand answers. That's a very important one. No matter who you heckle, like, just ask your freaking questions. Demand answers. Don't scurry around behind it, and there shouldn't be anything bad around it, for God freaking sakes. Now, I thought about this long and hard. What is allowing this to happen? Of course, we are seeing just polarizing media doing extremely well when it comes to their hits, when it comes to their AdSense revenue, when it comes to their followers. We're seeing Occupy Democrats skyrocket. We're seeing Breitbart skyrocket. And that is because they are biased on one freaking side, and they are not beholden to any real principles or the truth. They will disavow truth in order to protect their own biases in a freaking heartbeat. And we're seeing that all around. And I thought about this long and hard, and I was like, okay, I understand the media business. If I want to be more famous, if I want to get more hits, if I want to get more advertising revenue, all I have to do is say I'm pro-Trump or I'm anti-Trump. And I have to stick on that one side no matter what happens, no matter what side of the issue is being thrown at me. I always have to protect my side. And I thought about that, and then I said, fuck no. Excuse my language. Fuck no. Because then I would be giving up my principles, and I would be giving up the truest version of myself, and also stopping the progression of society. Because again, this is incentivized by you, the viewer, because a lot of people who are viewing information and news websites, they want to hear their own opinions regurgitated back to them to make them feel like they are right. Things that question their reality, things that question their gang affiliation, their side, automatically is not as popular as if a side automatically goes to one side. And that's why we're seeing this polarization. But that money, that fame is not worth me ever losing the truest version of myself and betraying my audience to give them the truth, which we claim to do. And we do it the best we can. On wearechange.org, by the way, we have a team of pro-Trump people and anti-Trump people. I tried to mix in the two in order to make sure that we could hold each other accountable, stick to the facts, and tell people the side of the truth that is not biased on either way. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, but we're trying to build an organization that does the best job to progress society forward and to uphold to the truth no matter what. Again, very generalized statement, but we do our best here. But at least right now, you know where my principles stand, and you know they are not wavering, and you know they will not go away no matter who's it.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. We are Change Luke Rudowski. We are Change on YouTube and wearechange.org. Subscribe on YouTube. Excuse me. Now, you know, a lot of these, you know, a lot of the mainstream media, as he points out, has been extremely hypocritical on this issue. They have been the ones to help keep alternative media out of, you know, press conferences. And, you know, now there's talk about, hey, we might actually allow some, you know, outside media sources in. And that itself would be extremely awesome. Will it happen? I don't know. I think that will come when we find out if mainstream media is willing to go along with Trump. If mainstream media goes along with Trump, will that little network of groups still have that exclusive access? They want to complain about free speech and freedom of the press because CNN didn't get to ask their question after they were attacked. How many media outlets do the mainstream media outlets attack? Constantly. And they never get it, you know, be there to have questions asked. You complain a lot of times about, well, you know, they don't have facts. They never talk to that person. But we have. Well, they can't get that access. They're not granted that access. It happens a lot. Now, freedom of speech, you know, the libel laws that are in place, Trump has talked about, you know, loosening those, which is kind of a scary thing for journalists and free speech. That should be addressed, but he hasn't done it. he hasn't, other than that one, talking about it, he hasn't drawn up a plan or a proposal to actually do that. But could he? Possibly. Now, we're going to go ahead and dive into some other news. Now, this article is from New York Times. Russia extends Edward Snowden's asylum. A day after President Obama commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the Russian government clarified on Wednesday that the fate of Edward Snowden, the other main source of secrets about United States surveillance in recent years, Mr. Snowden, a former National Security Agency contractor who was granted asylum in Russia in 2013, will be allowed to remain in the country for a couple more years. Maria Zakharova, a spokeswoman for the foreign ministry, said on Facebook. He and his supporters have been campaigning for a pardon from Mr. Obama, but the chances of clemency appear to be vanishing small, given that his name did not appear on a list of pardons on Tuesday. Mr. Snowden found himself essentially stranded in Moscow 4 years ago after he was thwarted in his attempts to fly to Latin America following the publication of articles in The Guardian and The Washington Post based on information he provided revealing extensive surveillance and data collection programs operated by the NSA. In response to a question about why Mr. Snowden and Miss Manning were being treated differently, Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, said on Tuesday that the documents leaked by the former NSA contractor were far more serious and far more dangerous than those by Miss Manning had disclosed. Miss Zakharova described her Facebook post as a rejection of an idea presented in a recent article in the cipher brief by former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morell. He suggested that Russia should extradite Mr. Snowden to the United States as a signal of goodwill to the incoming Trump administration. Ms. Zakharova said that Mr. Morell's suggestion of turning over Mr. Snowden would amount to a gift for the new American leader. That is apparently a gesture that Russia is not prepared to make. However, even though President-elect Donald Trump has spoken admiringly of Russia and its President Putin, the funniest thing is that the former deputy director of the CIA does not know that Snowden's residence permit in Russia was just extended for a couple more years, she wrote. So it really doesn't look like Snowden will get a pardon, by what Josh Earnest said. And, he hasn't been pardoned yet. Could it happen last minute? Could. Doubt it. I doubt that that's even going through the president's head at this point. And then Assange said that he would allow himself to be extradited under certain conditions. Telegraph, Julian Assange's conditions for extradition to U.S. not met, says lawyers. Lawyers for Julian Assange have indicated he may renege on a pledge to face extradition to the U.S. days after he promised to do so if the whistleblower Chelsea Manning was released from prison. The WikiLeaks founder said last week that he would leave his self-imposed exile in the Ecuadorian embassy in London if President Obama freed former U.S. Army intelligence analyst Manning, who was jailed for 35 years for leaking documents relating to the Iraq War. Mr. Obama announced on Tuesday that he had commuted Manning's sentence, meaning she will be released in May, but said the decision had nothing to do with Mr. Assange's offer. On Wednesday morning, Mr. Assange indicated that he would honor his promise, WikiLeaks said via its official Twitter account. Assange is still happy to come to the U.S., provided all of his rights are guaranteed, despite White House now saying Manning was not quid pro quo. Assange is still happy to come, and it shows the tweet. Later, however, Mr. Assange's U.S. lawyer, Barry Polak, said the clemency granted by President Obama did not meet the terms of Mr. Assange's offer to go to the U.S. Mr. Polak said Mr. Assange welcomes the announcement that Ms. Manning's sentence will be reduced and she will be released in May, but this is well short of what he sought. Mr. Assange had called for Chelsea Manning to receive clemency and be released immediately. Mr. Assange, 45, who is subject of an espionage investigation in America, has not been publicly charged with any crime in the U.S., though his legal team believes it is possible he could have been charged under seal, meaning the charges have been kept secret from him. Another legal source close to Mr. Assange said, I think Julian, like Donald Trump, is still distrustful of the CIA and the FBI, so I don't think he would go voluntarily to the U.S. or voluntarily put himself in a position where there is a risk of that. And you can read the rest of it. At Telegraph, I'm going to play part of this clip from a Ron Paul Liberty report about Chelsea Manning, because, you know, we don't see any clemency for Assange. We don't see it for Snowden, even though the Chelsea Manning thing they said wasn't to try to get Assange, it still very well could have been. And again, there's no current charges unless it's under seal, which they do that a lot of times, which a lot of times it even means they won't file the charges. They'll have them in an envelope under seal. They'll put a little flag out there, so if a person does cross a checkpoint or something, they are aware that that person is now in the United States, and they'll either follow them or then release the charges and put a warrant out. But they sometimes don't want to actually file the charges until the person's back in the country. So that's what Assange is basically expecting to happen. You know, there's charges, they just haven't filed them. But you still have people on the right going, well, Chelsea Manning's a traitor, whistleblower, traitor. Was reducing this sentence for Chelsea Manning a good thing? I believe so. And I think that might be one of the only things I've ever agreed on Obama with. Of course, he said things before he ever got elected that were constitutional and, Tea Party type talk. Again, talk, not action. His action disproved a lot of that talk. Let me play a little bit of this Ron Paul Liberty Report, and then we'll talk about it here. We won't play the whole thing, though.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Good to see you.
Hello, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. There were big news yesterday on Chelsea Manning. It's a case that we've been interested in for so many years. It's hard to believe. What is it, 7 years now since this has been going on?
Yeah.
But I think most people know about her. But, very briefly, she, exposed some of the things that the government is doing. The most important thing, really, the atrocities that we were committing in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the state didn't like it, so she gets arrested and court-martialed and ended up in prison. But that's just part of it. She released classified information, but in comparison to what other people have gotten in sentencing for doing what she did, she got really a tremendous sentence, 35 years, and essentially it was solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And not a stable person to begin with, and attempting committing suicide. It was a real mess. But we were interested in the case, obviously, because we were learning the truth, getting the truth out, exposing our government for the mistakes that they're making. And that's not well received by the people who want to perpetuate the falsehoods about the government and the falsehoods about the empire. So this is terrible. Truth is very dangerous to them. And of course, they had to come down hard on her. So she's been in this prison all this time. So I think I didn't follow it on a day-to-day basis and try to get inside information on how seriously they were considering clemency for her. But, when it was announced, that was a big deal. And a lot of people have been talking about it. There's a lot of people furious about it. And there's a lot of people that are happy that it's some revelation of truth. I recall, the big episode with Daniel Ellsberg, when he exposed the truth about Vietnam. And I was probably, evolving in my determination to understand libertarian thinking. And, I was just trying to figure out, but, the consensus was that guy was a criminal and he was a traitor, should go to jail. It turned out on technicalities he didn't have to. But he's a citizen today. When we talk about Manning and Snowden and these other, he's sort of looked up to as a person that understands this. So I don't know what's going to happen here, but I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we've actually put some things on our website dealing with this case.
Yeah, it was a surprise. There were some rumors that he might be on the short list for last-minute commutation of sentence or pardon or what have you. And we actually, there was a flurry of notes, I think, trying to encourage the president to consider this. As a matter of fact, as you know, we were contacted by Amnesty, who've been working on it very hard, and they asked whether you and Dennis Kucinich would sign a joint letter to the president, urgent joint letter, which, of course, you did. And that joined a lot of other letters, and I think probably had a big influence on the president's decision. But it was a surprising last-minute decision. As you point out, people that have been convicted for infractions similar to Manning's have gotten significantly less prison sentences. So it seems appropriate that 7 years in solitary confinement is time served.
Well, to me, it was a delight. I saw one headline this morning, and I didn't read it, but it said, can Trump reverse this after he's president? I don't think he can without looking at the details, but I think it would be darn foolish for him. As a matter of fact, it's probably a blessing in disguise for him not to deal with it, because he probably wouldn't have been able to suffer. Let's say most people are sympathetic in spite of the noise made by the neocons, he'd probably have just a difficulty looking like that person, because he hasn't made any friendly statements toward Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
So I think it probably helps Trump in that he doesn't have to deal with this. And so I think it's good, because there's more truth out. And I think the more respect we can give for the revelation of truth, even if it's the practice of civil disobedience, the better. Because the government's not in the business about telling us how they mess up on things. I mean, I've said many times on this show what commissions are set up for. Yeah. You might say, well, let's have a commission and study this out and find out why things didn't work out. Well, commissions are set up to cover up mistakes by government, or cover up sinister plans by the government. You know, maybe they are involved in nefarious activities. So I think anything that we can do, of course, to me, this would be less of a problem if we had our government less involved in world affairs, running the world, less involved in spying on Americans, less involved in participating in the biggest economic manipulator and financial manipulator in Federal Reserve. It's all those things that encourages reason for us to know more. So I think this is great.
Yeah, and as you point out, the usual suspects, the neocons and the Washington elite, were less than happy about this revelation. John McCain said her dishonor will last forever. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, said Chelsea Manning's treachery put American lives at risk and exposed some of our nation's most sensitive secrets. Tom Cotton, the neoconservative senator, we ought not treat a traitor like a martyr.
Wow.
And there was an interesting tweet storm yesterday, and that's just kind of a funny word, but it was quite fascinating. We have actually our first graphic. Judith Miller, who you will remember was really the chief person who helped amplify the lies of the neocons about Iraq and put us into a war where so many people were killed. Here's what she put up yesterday. Obama commutes sentence of Chelsea Manning. How many people died because of a Manning leak? And actually, our second graphic will answer that question, and it was answered back in 2013 when we first started. And if we have that up, this is a brigadier general that was investigating it for the prosecution. He had to admit during the trial that he could not find any instance where there was a death attributable to what Chelsea Manning had leaked.
Now, can Judith Miller hide behind, well, she was misled by the people who were gathering the intelligence, or these outright lies?
That's exactly what she did. When the storm was breaking, she went back in there and said, it's not my fault, essentially, not my fault. They just fed me the wrong info. You know, the
same way that our leaders so often say that, and everybody who went along, with Bush and going into war, well, we were misled. And how about the British example of that too? They actually did some serious looking into it and found out that there was some deliberate misleading by the intelligence agency, and they participated. I mean, they were our cheerleaders, for getting us involved in war. But they worry about it, and rightfully so. But I think WikiLeaks went out of their way to make sure that no names were left on this material. And they talk about people dying.
Yeah.
How many people died at the hands of the lies told by the United States government along with its allies? I mean, not thousands, probably millions of people when you add up everybody in all the wars of the past 15 years. It was, I figured there was at least 10,000 Americans when you add up all the contractors and everything. But how many people are continuing to die? I mean, every day you'll read, if you look around, civilians, collateral damage, more people died. Yes, we have to stop them. ISIS is, doing this. They never want to evaluate the whole situation. They don't understand the politics of the area, the history, or anything else. But yes, the government tells lies. But what happens if an individual ever lies to the government? That's the whole thing. It's perjury. An FBI agent, they come in and do all sorts of things. And then if it's a teeny weeny lie, that becomes 1,000 times bigger than the crime that they were charged with, which they couldn't be convicted of. So it's the fact that there's a place that we put our government in that they don't deserve. The government is supposed to be small and subservient to us, and we're not supposed to have to be crawling and obeying every single thing they say, or listening or believing every single thing they say. That's what the real problem. But I think there's some encouraging signs about how much we're believing our government.
Yeah, I think and that's probably something we can thank people like Manning and Snowden and others for. But going back to Judith Miller, this is a person literally with blood on her hands. I mean, it sounds dramatic, but it's true. She willingly repeated what her confidential sources told her. She was a stenographer for the neocons. Every salacious detail. Saddam's drones, are capable of bombing over and over and over. She did it without questioning. She didn't do a reporter's job. She did a stenographer's job. Yeah. And now she's questioning everything. But what about the others? We know, for example, that Manning's releases did not result in anyone killed. But what about Cheney's lies? Oh, yeah. What about Rumsfeld's lies? What about the people underneath them? Karen Kwiatkowski told us a lot about what was happening in the Pentagon at the time when the neocons were forcing only intelligence up that told one part of the story.
In recent weeks, the big news item is the issue of fake news. You mean there's actually fake stories out that aren't true? But, it doesn't seem like there's anything new about this. I was reading a little bit about, even the beginning of the neoconservative type foreign policy back at the beginning of the last century. It was the same thing. It was fake news. I mean, getting into the Spanish-American War, it's fake news. And so... But I think this whole issue of fake news coming out is very interesting because I think that's good. American people should realize it. But instead of the people portraying these lies and innuendos, they don't quit. They seem to buckle down and tell bigger lies and more frequent lies. And I think it's interesting when I heard stories from people who had come from the Soviet system about how the people of the Soviet Union, they didn't believe a word they were told. It was all propaganda, and they knew they were lying. All they did was they tried to survive, and survive the Gestapo and the KGB. That's what they do in dictatorships.
And we're getting there. As you say, that is a bright spot that people aren't believing. But, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to go over exactly what Chelsea Manning leaked, because you'll hear a lot about what happened. But there were four main categories of things that she leaked. Videos, and one of the most famous was Collateral Murder, which showed really the U.S. drone operators killing civilians in the street and celebrating that fact. Many of those videos. Incident reports from Iraq and Afghanistan, info on the torture of detainees, and thousands of State Department cables. And there was a great piece in The Nation a couple of years back. Chase Mader wrote it. And he went through a couple of the things that came out in the cables. These are terribly secret things that we dare not know. But if you indulge me, I'll read you a couple of them. And there's a bonus one in the end that I think you'll really be interested in. But here's from Chase's story. Information leaked from the Pentagon and files obtained by The Guardian, which is the original publisher of the WikiLeaks stuff, contained details of more than 100,000 people killed in Iraq following the U.S. invasion. Can't know about that. Egyptian torturers were trained by the FBI. Can't know about that. State Department memo, the U.S.-backed 2009 coup in Honduras was illegal and unconstitutional. We hacked their country. Washington was misled by its own diplomats on the Russia-Georgia showdown. This is what we learned. And here's the bonus. You're going to love this. The original full leaked cable from April Glaspie to Washington, D.C. after she met with Saddam Hussein in 1990. That's one of the things we learned from that. Yeah. Can't know that.
And that gave the green light
to the war.
That's right.
So this is why they're so angry.
We don't care about a border dispute between two little old countries in the Middle East, and yet they set up the stage for the so-called justification for all-out war forever. So
as you said when we started, these things are a challenge to the state, and that's why the state reacted.
No, they cannot stand it, and yet the American people have tolerated it too much, but fortunately less so. But it's getting.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. You can watch the rest of that Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Subscribe, and you can also check it out on RonPaulLibertyReport.com along with other articles. the right doesn't like when the military industrial complex exposed. There is a large neocon base on the right. And what's really funny is the anti-war on the left tend to be pro-war when they're in power. But what the left has done a little bit more than the right, not, the right's done it too, but is where, under Obama, he relied heavily on, the NATO, United Nations. It had nothing to do with America. I just need to go to NATO and United Nations. I don't need to go to Congress. Something the right has done less of, but has still also used those organizations as leverage. But what we've seen out of the neocons, not only with Chelsea Manning, but with Edward Snowden and Assange, is, we got to take them out. They're traitors. They're all traitors. Hold on, Assange was an American. How's he a traitor? We heard this about Assange. He's a traitor. Hold on. Assange is Australian. Well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it kind of does. If we're going to, have a legitimate conversation and thought, it has to be on facts, not emotion. And if you say you stand for freedom, and if you say you stand for the Constitution on top of that, and, I'm not the biggest constitutionalist because I'm a libertarian, but I believe that, the Constitution from where we are now is a big leap towards libertarianism. If you look at the Bill of Rights. But when we look at it, we see that they don't want freedom. They want control. Both sides want control. And we have groups on both sides that are willing to wage war and surveil the citizens of this country so they can, keep power. Whether it be Nixon or under Obama administration, where groups were targeted through the IRS. Under Nixon, he was, he was a part of that. Under the Obama administration, there's people that believe that he was, but there was no evidence that has been presented to prove that. But Obama wants to say he's had this scandal-free, presidency, but in reality, it's been filled with scandals, whether he's been a part of it or he's been the head of the administration while it's happened, the steward of that. It's still the blemish of your presidency. And it's not always going well. Your diehard fans that you tend not to be able to do anything wrong for. those aren't the ones. It's the ones that they're waiting to see you do what you do. It's the ones that, because he couldn't keep that, I believe, is why Hillary wouldn't ever. Obama has, under his presidency, this country has become more divided in many different ways. And this also came down to the Electoral College. It really proved what many have been saying about, Middle America. Middle America has, under Obama, been ignored. And I would exclude Chicago from that, because Chicago is like a mini hub in between the coastal, major coastal areas like LA, California area, and New York, of course, Maryland, Pennsylvania area. Chicago is kind of like that little corrupt area here in the Midwest. And it's funny because they wanted to come out and try to blame Indiana. And I've been waiting for this. I've mentioned this on the show before, but I've been waiting for this, for them to come out and blame Indiana for the gun crimes in Chicago. Because, well, it's because Indiana's laws are so relaxed that we have so high crime. Hold on. If it was our laws that are relaxed that cause a high crime, why isn't all of Indiana in this high crime? What you do find is Democratic ran urban areas that tend to have higher crime the more Democratic they become. And I know of one city in particular that kind of bounces between the Democratic, Republican, leaning type atmosphere, and, well, the county and the city. And as of late, it tends to lean a lot heavier Democratic. Of course, we've had a lot of groups, it seems, move in that have wanted to set up shop in an area that has kind of become, well, it became a really nice, comfortable, small, or I always like to call it a big small town. It wasn't a tiny town, but it wasn't a big city, and it had that small town feel to it. Even though you didn't know everybody, you tend to find out and know people that you didn't know you knew, and it's just, well, I don't know you, but I know your cousin. It was one of those things. But the more democratic it's become, the more special interests it tends to have. And I thought this before when it was tend to be a little bit more Republican. And I'm like, well, I think the Republicans, favor their people. Well, I think I had that influence because, well, they gave tax breaks to businesses, more tax breaks to businesses, which brought in business. It made a business-friendly environment, and it brought jobs that under some of the Democrats had gone away. Big factories had shut down. It needed, more business to be able to invest in the area. Well, under Democrats, people's taxes are going up and they're building fancy things that only a few, a percentage of the people want to, like to, or willing to pay for would go to. Ballpark. They had a ballpark, but they wanted this fancy one downtown. And they're talking about all kinds of other stuff. Well, it doesn't bring the business that they always tell you it's going to be. Oh, we'll bring in a stadium and it'll be more business. Well, for a few people, but in the process, so much tax dollars go to help subsidize all this that the urban residential areas that are more lower income, well, if the streets aren't kept up, the sidewalks aren't kept up, and they can barely afford to keep up the house because, well, the jobs have moved to these, department stores downtown because of the stadium, and, well, that doesn't, pay the bills. Then the corporate taxes start going up and all the business, because even small business is usually a corporation. That's how business works. All these taxes start going up to pay for all this. Then it's expensive living with a high amount of poverty, which leads to a lot of violence and drug use and alcohol use. And you get Detroit, Michigan. Drive around a lot of large cities that have invested heavily in the downtown area, and try to drive the streets if your car will make it around the streets. Oh, and by the way, they add wheel tax after wheel tax and gas tax and wheel tax and gas tax, and roads are still crap. But they made fancy looking turn signals for you. Fancy lighting up and down the pothole street so you can see everything you're hitting. This, it's one of those things that I don't want to side with the right, because so many neocons are on the right pushing a lot of this. And then you have the corporatists on the right that really push for the kind of more monopoly controlled, which I think, again, that's where a lot of my early look at, hey, this is, it's the Republicans that are so corrupt. No, both sides are corrupt. But a lot of times I see worse effects come out of the left. And I think that's because they become more socialists. And I think that was evidence with the Bernie Sanders support. Now, I don't think that they should not be able to have their views, but I don't think they should have the ability to have government use force to take something that I've worked, hard for. Well, I've worked hard. Well, I no offense, I don't know, whoever wants to make this claim, but I know a lot of people that are socialists and they don't work hard. They complain hard, but they don't work hard. They don't contribute other than philosophy and protesting and civil disobedience. Well, civil disobedience is good, but how is saying government doesn't do enough for truly civil disobedience. Now, since we talked about free speech, I seen something from Reason that I wanted to cover, and this has to do with a group of Asians, a band, and they call themselves the Slants, and according to Reason, that became a band name too racist to trademark. And while this isn't according to Reason, but Reason reported on this, I wanted to go ahead and cover this. Political correctness and, this kind of, in a way, it's really censorship of free speech that they go, well, your name as a group is racist. And we're talking about Asian people that name themselves the Slants, maybe not, because they're Asian, for other reasons. I don't know. We'll get into this right here. You'll hear it from them directly. But it's political correctness completely out of control.
They said your name is disparaging to persons of Asian descent. And I took a second and I said, well, do they know we're of Asian descent?
Hi, I'm Meredith Bragg from Reason TV. Today we are talking with Simon Tam. He is the bass player and the founder of the Slants. They are in Washington, D.C. We're going to play a few shows, but more importantly, they will be fighting for the right to trademark their name at the United States Supreme Court on Wednesday. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So very briefly, give us a quick history. Why did you form the band? How did you come up with the name?
Back in about 2004 or so, I had just moved to Portland, Oregon. I dropped out of college to tour in a punk rock band. Around that time period, someone said, hey, you should really check out this movie called Kill Bill. And I'm watching this movie in my apartment, and there's this really iconic scene. This woman named Maura Nishi, who kind of walks into this restaurant with all these mafia members behind her. And, for most people, this is just another trademark Quentin Tarantino scene. But for me, it was like an epiphany. I just had to stop there, pause the film and thought, why is this different for me? And then I realized it was the first time that I had ever seen an American-produced film that depicted Asians as cool, confident, and sexy. And I was like, wow, the art form that I love, music, has the same issue. There are no Asian Americans on the cover of Rolling Stone, on the Billboard charts, on Spin, on MTV back when they used to play music videos. So I thought something's got to change. And so I wanted to not be the token guy in the band anymore. I wanted to start my own band that would just kind of celebrate that culture. And that's when I got the idea of starting this Asian American kind of project. Now, throughout that process, I started asking people hey, what's something you think all Asians have in common? I'm trying to think of a band name here. And they told me Slanted Eyes. And I thought, that's really interesting because number one, it's not true. But number two, we can use it to talk about our slant on life as people of color. And number three, it sounds like, the kind of a band Debbie Harry would front. So I was like, this is perfect. And so then we became the Slants.
You wanted to trademark your name. Why was that important?
We had been touring for a while, and we were already doing pretty well. We did a couple national tours. NPR All Things Considered did this story on us because we were busted into anime conventions and playing for this geek army. And around that time period, a friend of mine who's an attorney said, hey, Simon, I really think you should get a trademark on your band name. It's really important for bands to do who are going to the next level. And he said, let me handle it for you. It'll only be a couple $100, and in about 6 months, this whole thing will be over with. Of course, things turned out a little bit different because almost a decade later, here I am fighting for this right at the Supreme Court as well. But, it's interesting because like when people are talking about these issues about trademark rights, they keep saying like things that, like basically saying it's not important for bands or musicians to have. They keep saying like, well, Mr. Tam can still use the name of the band if he wants. But the reality is that it affects musicians much more so than they think. When you don't have a trademark registration, it's way more difficult to get a record label offer or licensing deals or other things that are critical for a up and coming music business.
Did you think at the time that it was going to be provocative?
The name has never been provocative. I actually thought it was kind of funny. I thought, okay, we could kind of flip this slur around and do like a positive, self-empowering kind of thing with the word. But that being said, like I had never been called a slant my whole life. I've been called many other things, all sorts of colorful words that people can think of for Asian Americans. But slant was one of them. So I thought this is kind of a clever, fun take on it.
The U.S. Patent Office denied your trademark. Why?
When I first got the call for this, I thought it was a practical joke. And my attorney calls me and he says, hey, Simon, we've got a problem. The trademark office actually rejected your application. And I said, well, did I fill something out incorrectly? Did I do something wrong? He's like, no, all that's fine. He said, but they said your name is disparaging to persons of Asian descent. And I took a second and I said, well, do they know we're of Asian descent? We just did this tour. We worked with over 100 plus shows across America with Asian American festivals. Who did they find that said it was disparaging? And they said nobody. But they did cite urbandictionary.com. They found an old Wikipedia entry, and then they showed a photograph of Miley Cyrus pulling her eyes back in a slant-eye gesture. Are you serious? That's messed up. Like, you can't even put this stuff in a junior high classroom and have it accepted. Why is the government using this? So we decided to appeal. We thought they were just completely off base, and we found out over the years, over and over again, they continue to use like really questionable evidence just because they want to justify their decision, even though they knew it was wrong.
Especially in rock music, you came from a punk background. It is littered. The history of music and punk music and rock music is littered with names specifically designed to provoke. Why are those fine? And like, what's different about your band name?
So I'm not sure. I mean, when we asked them, we said, well, hold on a second. If slant is an inherent racial slur like you claim it is, why do you have over 800 other trademark registrations for slant? If it's really racist towards Asians, why did you give it out to hundreds of people, but you denied it in this case? The government said it is incontestable that the applicant is a part of an Asian group and is of Asian descent. In other words, what they're saying is the problem isn't with the name of the band. It's with us being Asian and using the name of the band. Because in their minds, if people go to a concert and they see a band called The Slants and there's a bunch of Asians on stage, or they go to theslants.com and they see photos of Asian Americans on there, they're going to automatically think of a racial slur and not any other possible definition. But by a logical construct, like that basically means anyone can register a trademark for The Slants as long as they're not Asian. So in their goal of trying to fight racism, they're denying me rights based on my race. And that's simply can't stand.
In your mind, who gets to decide what is offensive?
Yeah, I mean, I think offensiveness is up to the individual person. And really, it's up to you if you want to accept that offensiveness, like as an insult from someone else or not. It's not up to the government. You can't write a law about it, especially because cultures and language, they shift over time. Frankly, that's bad law. You know, it's bad law to try and decide what's offensive and not. After this, we're hitting the road. We go on tour this spring, and we're going to do a cross-country tour. Of course, the Supreme Court decision is going to come out when it comes out, probably late summer, early fall. But we're going to continue recording music, playing it, touring, releasing music videos, and doing all the stuff that a band should do that doesn't have a giant court case hanging over its head. So we're really excited about that.
Again, that's Reason TV on YouTube and Reason.com. Check them out. Subscribe on YouTube. They put out a lot of good videos. And you know, with this whole thing, where they're claiming racism by using racism. They're saying that, well, because you're now we're going to say because you're Asian and using that name that's going to be offensive because it's going to cause people to go, they're slants because they're Asian and that's all they're going. What? That's racist. And again, you know, he points out something. Culture is constantly shifting. What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? Groups, you know, changing how they look at things. You have, you know, religions, you know, shifting how they look at things. He was completely right. It's bad law, but this is what happens when you continue to grow government, grow the federal government and the executive powers. You know, things that become offensive are now, you know, these people are now in a position to punish something they feel offensive. And, you know, government's been doing this for a long time. You know, it started out with good intents, but the government has been corrupt for a very long time. But what it's becoming now is truly attacking large groups of people, attacking, you know, religious people, attacking non-minorities and minorities at the same time, and then turning them against each other. Class warfare. You can say that the rich, but who do you really consider the rich? Is it truly the ultra rich? The 0.1%? You know, these people have money no matter where they go. So, you know, we truly have to understand that we're being pinned against each other. That benefits them, and it puts us in a situation where we're not going to win. There is not going to be a winning side. The side that thinks they're going to win will be the puppets. And once the other side's gone, guess who's going to be the runners, the labor guys? It's going to be you, whether you like it or not, whether you're smart or not, because you helped them secure ultimate power. And if you go through history, and it doesn't really matter what empire you study, you see this happening in the most unbearable times of an empire, when the empire fears collapse and they try to grasp power before they lose it. They become extreme. Anybody that tries to stand up for what's right becomes the enemy. Others understand how wrong it is, but they will just go along with it, pretend they don't see it. Let's hope we don't have someone in power that's willing to do these things. Let's hope we never have to deal with this in our lifetimes, and hopefully, you know, our children, our grandchildren don't. But eventually, empires become extremely brutal beyond what we know right now. But are we truly far off? It really depends, not just on the government, but really on society. Don't cheer for Hillary. Don't cheer for Bernie. You know, the saying goes, you know, before you can help anybody else, you first have to help yourself. And I think that's more powerful than anybody realizes, because when more of society lives by that, even when they hit hard times, they don't want the help, and they work hard to try to get back on their feet. And you know, other people will be like, you know, I'm helping you out, I don't want the help, too bad you're getting it. That's where society thrives, because everybody has an ambition to do for themselves. And then when people are in a decent position for themselves, it's easier for them to lend a hand when someone else that's working hard, you know, slips here and there. Because, well, we definitely know humans aren't perfect. And at times, people will flip out, mental breakdown, evil spirited. You're not going to be able to stop that. What you can do is defend yourself. These are the important, you know, rights that we as beings have. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I also want you to, you know, a lot of people here probably shop through Amazon, other maybe online sources. If you shop Amazon, try shopping Amazon through UCY.tv. If you go to UCY.tv, scroll down to the bottom, there is an Amazon button, and click that button, takes you to Amazon, and you get the same great deals, same great prices and shipping rates. And at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback for partnering with Amazon. And, you know, that is one way to support alternative media and alternative networks like UCY.tv. And, you know, mainstream media has become extremely political, and it's really threatened by alternative media. And it's important that those listeners out there help support alternative media, because they will try to, you know, outpace us, and they got the money to try to do that. So every little dollar helps keep operating costs down. And, you know, it also shows that, you know, we are doing a good job here at UCY.tv and all the other hosts here. If we're out there reaching people, it's always a way to benefit society. There's so many different opinions and different views out there, and UCY has given a platform for all those views to be expressed in a way that is non-threatening and a place for free speech and freedom of thought to really be expressed. You know, when we look at mainstream media, we've seen so much division. So it's really important when you're looking at different outlets for alternative media. You look for the people that they're not being biased. They just want the facts out there, and they want people to, you know, here it is. This is what's going on. How do we come together to solve this? What can we agree on? And if we can't agree on it, maybe we probably shouldn't do it. Because that gets back to that back and forth. Who's in power? Who's in power? Oh, they did this to me before. Oh, they did that to me before. When they say Congress can't do anything, sometimes that's probably a good thing. And we as a society need to really kind of focus on that. Where we're not always going to be able to do something because we're not always going to agree on something to do. We can only truly change our personal lives if we respect freedom. Again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Also, go check out My Patriot Supply. If you go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot, it'll take you there. Same great deals, same great prices. And at the same time, we get a little kickback on our side to help cover our operating costs. We still have to have internet access and all of our, machinery to run this broadcast on our end. And, there's other broadcasts coming up after this. I really think you guys should tune in because there are great hosts coming up after this. And, don't forget to follow UCY on Facebook and Twitter. Also, check out antityrannynews.com on Facebook and Twitter. Follow us. Also on YouTube, antityrannynews.com and ucy.tv. And, as we go forward, we're going to have to realize that there is no utopia. This utopia that the left always proposes, and this utopia that you hear from the right, multiple utopias on both sides, really, that you always hear about, the ultra religious utopian dream, and then the neocon, America is the strongest, ticket. And on the left, the socialist and communist type paradise that doesn't exist. And I think libertarians, the ones that truly understand it the best, where there is no such thing as a utopia. But what you can do is provide a free society that you have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to live the life you choose without harming your neighbor or others. But when someone does abridge those rights, you have your rights to protect yourself, your family, and your neighbors and your community. Respect property rights. Take care.